Hi guys, this is Arvind from MindMajix, and today I welcome you all to this amazing session on PLSQL interview questions. Okay, so guys, this is a very important topic as far as for those candidates who want to crack a database developer interview, database admin interview, and also like software developers or software engineers, even if they have good knowledge of databases and like SQL and PLSQL, so it will be an added advantage for them as well. Okay, so this is the whole agenda, or you can say the idea behind this session. So we will be trying to cover maximum questions over here. Okay, so what you can do is just before your actual interview, you can go through this video, and this video will serve as a revision for the concepts that you already know. Okay, so without any further delay, let's get started. And before moving ahead, I want you guys to subscribe to MindMajix's YouTube channel and also hit that bell icon so that you never miss an update from us. Okay, so without any further delay, let's begin with our first question. So the first and very important question is, what is the difference between PL/SQL and SQL? Guys, as you can see on the screen, whenever you're asked such a question in the actual interview also, so what you can do is you can take a piece of paper and you can make two columns, one column for SQL and the other column for PLSQL, and then you can write the points of comparison. Okay, so here we will be comparing SQL and PLSQL based on a few points or parameters, as you can see. Okay, so first of all, the first thing that you can say over here is that SQL is a structured query language. Okay, and PLSQL is procedural language, which is an extension to the SQL. Okay, so this is the full form of SQL and PLSQL. And now if you talk about the execution, so in SQL, you take a single command at a time. Okay, and in PLSQL, you can have a block of code. So what do you mean by block of code? So here, block of code means multiple lines of codes. Okay, so that can be done in PLSQL. The next point over here is application. So here in SQL, source of data is to be displayed, and in PLSQL, application created by data acquired by SQL. Okay, next, for the structures in SQL, you have DDL and DML based queries and commands. And for PLSQL, it includes procedures, functions, and so on. Next point is, what is the recommendation for SQL? So you generally perform crude operations on data using SQL. And what is the purpose or usage of PLSQL? So with PLSQL, you can create applications to display data obtained using SQL. Okay, and now the last point over here is compatibility with each other. So SQL can be embedded into PLSQL, whereas PLSQL cannot be embedded in SQL. Okay, so guys, these were some of the points of comparison between SQL and PLSQL. The next question is, what is SQL, and also describe the types of SQL statements. So as we have seen, SQL stands for structured query language. So SQL is a language which is used to communicate with the server. And why do we communicate with the server? So we communicate with the server to access, manipulate, and control the data. Okay, so this is a brief definition of SQL. And now if you talk about the different types of SQL statements, so here you have, as you can see on the screen, 5 types of statements. The first statement is for data retrieval. So which query do you use for data retrieval? So here you use the select query. Okay, so select star from any particular database. So that is basically a data retrieval statement. Then you have the DML, or the data manipulation language. So here you can have insert, update, delete, and merge statements. After that, you have DDL, which is the data definition language. So here you can have create, alter, drop, rename, and truncate statements. After that, you have transaction control statements. So here you can use statements such as commit, rollback, Savepoint, and so on. And last but not the least, you have the DCL, or the data control language. And last but not the least, you have the data control language, or the DCL. So here you have statements such as grant and revoke. So the next question is, what is an alias in SQL statements? So alias is a user-defined alternative name given to a column or a table. So by default, column alias headings appear in the uppercase. So enclose the alias in double quotes to make it case sensitive. Okay. So, and a very important keyword that you must use while declaring an alias is AS in capital letters, and that too in double quotes. So this is a keyword. Just to give you an example, we have written a query over here. So here you can see select EMP name. This is a column as name from employee. Okay. So here instead of like when you execute this query, and here you can see employee name has been renamed to name. Okay. So this is, and you can see the keyword as in capital letters. So this is how you declare an alias or an alternative name for a particular column or a table. The next question is, what is a literal? And give an example of where it can be used. So literal is a string that can contain a character, a number, or a date that is included in the select list, and that is not a column name or a column alias. Date and character literals must be enclosed within single quotation marks, and number literals need not be included in it. Just to give you an example, as you can see over here, we have written select last name, and in single quotes we have written is a, and then you have mentioned the job ID as employee details from the employee. So this is how you use a literal in your query. The next question is, what is the difference between SQL and iSQL plus? So guys, as you can see over here, this is the difference between SQL and iSQL plus. So as you can see here, SQL is a language, structured query language, and iSQL plus is an environment. Okay, so here in SQL, character and date column headings are left justified and number column headings are right justified. So this is the default for SQL. Whereas in case of iSQL plus, the default heading justification is in the center. Next, so SQL cannot be abbreviated, like you cannot use short forms in SQL. Whereas in iSQL plus, you can use short forms wherever required. In SQL, it does not have a continuation character. Whereas in iSQL plus, you do have a continuation character, and which is nothing but a dash. So if the command is longer than one line, so this is where you use the dash. Okay, so basically the use of dash is just to continue the query. If the query doesn't fit in one line, you can use dash and write the query in the next line. Okay, and the last point over here is in SQL, you can use functions to perform some kind of formatting. Whereas in iSQL plus, you use commands to format the actual data. Okay, so this was a comparison between SQL and iSQL plus. The next question is, define the order of precedence used in executing the SQL statements. So guys, as you can see on the screen, these are the order of precedence, or the order in which the things are executed in a SQL statement or SQL query. Okay, so here you can see the order evaluated, which is 1, and the first thing which gets evaluated in a SQL query is the arithmetic operators. So which are the arithmetic operators? Plus, minus, multiplication, and division. After this, the concatenation operators get executed. Okay, and which are the concatenation operators? As you can see here, this double, what you can say, double, 2 lines, 2 single lines. Okay, so these are the concatenation operators. After this, the next order is comparison conditions, like equal to, not equal to, greater than, less than. Okay, so these kind of conditions get executed next. After this, you have is null or is not null, like, in or not in, and so on. After this, you have between and not between. Then you have not logical condition, and logical condition, and lastly, or logical condition. So these are the order of precedence that are used in actual execution of SQL queries or statements. The next question is a very important question. The question says, what are SQL functions, and describe in brief the different types of SQL functions. So SQL functions are a very powerful feature of SQL. SQL functions take arguments, but they always return some value. There are basically two distinct types of SQL functions, as you can see. So the first one is a single row function. So these functions operate on a single row to give one result per row. And now there are multiple types of single row functions such as character, number, date, conversion, and general. And if you talk about multiple row functions, so these functions operate on groups of rows to give one result per group of rows. And if you talk about types of multiple row functions, so here you have average, count, max, min, like maximum, minimum, sum, standard deviation, variance, and so on. The next question is, explain the character, number, and date function in detail. So character functions, so these type of functions accept character input and return both character and number values. And now if you talk about the types of character functions, so here you have the case manipulation functions, which is nothing but lower, upper, and init cap. And then you have the character manipulation functions such as concat, substring, length, left padding like lpad, right padding, rpad, trim, replace, and so on. Then if you talk about number functions, so these functions accept numeric input and return numeric values as output. So number functions are round, trunc or truncate, and modulus. And the next type of function is the date function. So date functions operate on values of the date data type. So all date functions return a value of date data type except the months between function, so which returns a number. So date functions are months between, add months, next day, last day, round, truncate, and so on. The next question is, what is a dual table? So the dual table is owned by the user system and it can be accessed by all the users. So it contains one column, dummy, and one row with the value X. So the dual table is useful when you want to return a value only once. So the value can be a constant, a pseudo column, or an expression that is not derived from a table with user data. The next question is, explain the conversion function in detail. So conversion functions convert a value from one data type to another. So conversion functions are basically of two types. The first one is implicit data type conversion. So here you have var or character to number or date. Then you have number to varchar2, and you also have date to varchar2. So these are implicit data type conversions. After this, you have the explicit data type conversion like to number, to character, and to date. So if you talk about to number, so this function is used to convert a character string to a number format. So to number function uses fx modifier, and the fx modifier specifies the exact matching for the character argument and number format model of the to number function. After this, you have the toChar function. So basically, this function is used to convert number or date data type to character format. And if you talk about the toDate function, so this function is used to convert character string to a date format. The next question is, describe the different types of general functions used in SQL. So guys, as you can see on the screen, these are the different types of general functions which are used in SQL. The first one is the NVL. So basically, this function converts a null value to an actual value. So here what you can do is, this for syntax is very simple. You just have to write NVL, and in round brackets you have to specify the expression 1 and expression 2. So if the expression 1 is null, then the NVL function returns the value of expression 2. Similarly, you have the NVL2, and in NVL2, if the expression 1 is not null, the NVL2 returns the expression 2, and if expression 1 is null, NVL2 returns expression 3. So you can have multiple expressions in NVL2. The next function is nullIf. So this function basically compares two expressions and returns null if they are equal, or the first expression if they are not equal. So the syntax again is very simple. You just have to write nullIf and expression1 and expression2 in round brackets. Then you have the cols function. So this function returns the first non-null expression in the expression list. And the advantage of the cols function over the NVL function is that cols function can take multiple alternative values. And then you have the conditional expressions. So these provide the use of if then else logic with a SQL statement. The next question is, what is the difference between count, like count star, count expression, and count distinct expression? So if you talk about the count star, so this returns a number of rows in the table, including duplicate rows and rows containing null values in any of the columns. Whereas in case of count expression or the EXP, it returns the number of non-null values in the column identified by the expression. After this, you have the count distinct expression. So this returns the number of unique non-null values in the column identified by the expression. The next question is, what is a subquery and describe its types? So a subquery is a select statement that is embedded in a clause of another select statement. So a subquery can be placed in where, having, and from clause. So if you talk about guidelines for using subqueries, like there are a few conditions before using them. So first, you must enclose subquery within the parentheses. Then you can place the subqueries on the right side of the comparison condition, and you use the single row operators with the single row subqueries and multiple row operators with the multiple row subqueries. So these are the guidelines that you must remember while using the subqueries. And if you talk about the types of subqueries, so here you have the single row subquery and multiple row subquery. So single row subqueries are queries that return only one row from the inner select statement. And single row sub comparison, I repeat, and single row comparison operators are equal to, greater than equal to, less than equal to, and so on. And if you talk about multiple row subqueries, so these queries that return more than one row from the inner select statement. So there are also multiple column subqueries that return more than one column from the inner select statement, and the operators here are in, any, and all. The next question is, like in the previous question we discussed about any and all operators. So the question says, what is the difference between any and all operators? So any operator compares value to each value returned by the subquery, and any operator has a synonym sum operator. So greater than any means more than minimum, and less than any means less than maximum, and equal to any is equivalent to in operator. And if you talk about the all operator, so all operator compares value to every value returned by the subquery. So similarly, greater than all means more than the maximum, less than all means less than the minimum, and greater than less than all is equivalent to not in condition. The next question is, what is a merge statement? So merge statement inserts or updates the rows in one table, and for this it makes use data from another table. So this particular merge statement is very useful in the data warehousing applications. The next question is, what is the difference between verify and the feedback command? So verify command is used to confirm the changes in the SQL statement, like the old values compared to the new values, and the verify command is defined with set verify and on or off. Whereas if you talk about feedback command, so this command displays the number of records returned by a particular query. The next question is, what is the use of double ampersand in SQL queries, and give an example? So basically the use of double ampersand is if you want to reuse the variable value without prompting the user each time. For example, if you write a query like select employee number, employee name, and double ampersand column name from the employee, order by, and column name. So in this particular query, you do not want to prompt user each time you want to, I repeat. So here in this particular query, you use the ampersand in front of column name, and you want to reuse the variable without asking the user each time. So there like in this particular scenario, you can use this operator double ampersand. The next question is, what are joins and how many types of joins are there? So guys, as you can see here, these are the types of joins. So if you talk about the Oracle database, so in Oracle 8i and the previous versions, so these were the types of joins. And for SQL 9i, like 1999 onwards, you have these types of joins. So in Oracle 8i, you have the equi-join, outer join, self-join, non-equi-join, and Cartesian product. Whereas in SQL 9i and onwards, you have the natural join or the inner join. Then you have the left outer, right outer, full outer join, and the self-join, which was in Oracle 8i and the previous versions. So in the higher versions, it was join on, and then non-equi-join is join using, and Cartesian product is a cross join. So just the names have been changed, rest the functionality and the execution is one and the same. Now, the next question is an extension to the previous question. So explain all the joins which are used in Oracle. So the first join that you can see over here is the Cartesian join. So when a join condition is invalid or omitted completely, the result is a Cartesian product in which all the combination of rows are displayed. So to avoid a Cartesian product, always include a valid join condition in the where clause. So to join the n tables together, you need minimum number of n-1 join conditions. If you talk about equi-joins, so this type of join involves primary and foreign key relations. So equi-joins can also be called as simple or inner joins. Then you have the non-equi-joins. So non-equi-join condition containing something other than an equality operator. So the relationship obtained using an operator other than an equal operator. The conditions such as less than equal to and greater than equal to can be used, but between is the simplest to represent the non-equi-join. Then you have the outer joins. So outer join is used to fetch rows that do not meet the join condition. So the outer join operator is the plus sign and it is placed on the side of the join that is deficient in information. The outer join operator can appear only on one side of the expression, the side that has information missing. And if you talk about self join, so this particular join is used for joining a table to itself. The next question is, explain all joins used in Oracle 9i and later versions. So here you have cross joins, natural joins, join with the using clause, join with the on clause, and left, right, and full outer join. So if you talk about cross join, so the cross join clause produces the cross product of two tables. So this is the same as the Cartesian product between two tables. And if you talk about natural joins, so this is used to join two tables automatically based on the columns which have matching data types and names. And here you use the keyword natural join. So this particular join is same to the equi-join. Then you have the join with using clause. So if several columns have the same names, but the data types do not match, then the natural join clause can be modified with the using clause to specify the columns that should be used for an equi-join. Next, you have the join with the on clause. So use the on clause to specify a join condition, and the on clause makes the code easy to understand, and the on clause is equals to the self joins. The on clause can also be used to join columns that have different names. And finally, we will talk about the left, right, and full outer joins. So left outer join displays all the rows from the table that is left to the left outer join clause, and right outer join displays all the rows from the table that is right to the right outer join clause. And full outer join displays all of the rows from both the tables, either left or the right to the full outer join clause. So guys, with this, we have come to the end of the beginner, or you can say the freshers questions. Like question number 1 to 20, these questions were meant for freshers. And now question number 21 onwards, like roughly 20 questions will be for PLSQL developer interview questions. So the next question over here is, what is the difference between entity, attribute, and tuple? So entity is a significant thing about which some information is required. For example, an employee table is an entity. If you talk about attribute, so an attribute is something that describes the entity. For example, employee name, like if you have an employee table, so here employee number, employee name, employee address are the attributes. And if you talk about a tuple, so a tuple is basically a row in a relation. The next question is, what is a transaction? And describe the common errors that can occur while executing any transaction. So transaction consists of collection of DML statements like data manipulation language statements that forms a logical unit of work. So the common errors that can occur while executing any transaction are the violation of constraint, I repeat, the violation of constraints, data type mismatch, value too wide to fit in the column. Apart from this, the system crash or the server gets down, the session gets killed, locking takes place, and so on. The next question is, what is locking in SQL and describe its types? So locking prevents destructive interaction between concurrent transactions. So locks held until commit or rollback. So basically, locks are held until you execute commit or rollback statement. And if you talk about types of locks, so here you have implicit locking and explicit locking. So basically, implicit locking occurs for all SQL statements except the select statement. And if you talk about explicit locking, so this can be done by the user manually. Additionally, there are two types of locking methods like exclusive and share. So if you talk about exclusive, so locks out the other users. And if you talk about share, so this particular lock methods, I repeat, so this particular lock method allows other users to access. The next question is, what is the difference between commit, rollback, and Savepoint? So if you talk about commit, so this particular statement ends the current transaction by making all the pending data changes permanent. Now, if you talk about rollback, so rollback ends the current transaction by discarding all the pending data changes. And Savepoint divides a transaction into smaller parts. So you can roll back the transaction to a particular named Savepoint. The next question is, what are the advantages of commit and rollback statements? So these particular statements like commit and rollback, they ensure the data consistency. So what do you mean by data consistency? So data consistency means that you have uniform and even data throughout your database. There will not be any kind of, unambiguity in terms of data, like there won't be any missing data, there won't be any null values in your data. So this is the primary advantage of commit and rollback. After this, you can preview the data changes before making the changes permanent. Okay, so as we have seen, like once you execute a commit statement, so it means that the data changes are permanent. So, but with rollback, you can preview any data changes before making them permanent. And the next point over here is, using commit and rollback, you can group logically related operations together. The next question is, describe the naming rules for creating a particular table. So there are a few rules, or you can say the guidelines that must be followed for creating a table. And those guidelines are, the table name must begin with a letter. And the table name can be 1 to 30 characters long. So 30 is the size of the name of the table. After this, the table name can only contain alphabets like capital A to capital Z and small a to small z. Apart from this, you can also have 0 to 9 numbers in the table name. You can have underscore, you can have the $sign, and then you can also have a hashtag or the hash symbol in the table name. After this, the table name cannot duplicate the name of another object which is owned by the same user. And the table name cannot be an Oracle server reserved keyword. So these are some of the guidelines that you must follow while creating a table. The next question is, what is a default option in a table? A column can be given a default value by using the default option. So this option prevents null values from entering the column if a row is inserted without a value for that particular column. So the default value can be a literal or an expression or a SQL function such as sysdate and user but the value cannot be the name of another column or a pseudo column such as next val or the cur val. The next question is, what is the difference between user tables and data dictionary? So if you talk about user tables, so this is a collection of tables created and maintained by the user. So this particular table can contain the user information. If you talk about, I repeat, if you talk about data dictionary, so this is a collection of tables created and maintained by the Oracle server. So it contains database information, and all the data dictionary tables are owned by the sys user. The next question is, describe a few data types which are used in SQL. So guys, as you can see on the screen, these are the data types that you can use in SQL. The first one is the varchar2. So for varchar2, you can use the minimum size as 1 and maximum size is 4000. If you talk about char, and as you can see here, you have to specify the size in round brackets in varchar and in char also. So for char, the minimum size is 1 and the maximum size is 2000. After this, you have the number, and for number, you have to specify P and S. So P stands for precision and its range is 1 to 38, and S stands for scale, which can range, I repeat, and scale can range from -84 to 127. After this, you have the date, which is again a data type. Then you also have a long, and its size is 2 GB. Similarly, you have clog, which size is 4 GB. Then you have the raw, whose maximum size is 2000. Then you also have long raw, whose size is 2 GB, and so on. The next question is, in what scenario you can modify a column in a table? So there are a few conditions or scenarios which you must understand while modifying a column. So you can increase the width or the precision of a numeric column, and you can increase the width on, I repeat, and you can increase the width of the numeric or character columns. You can decrease the width of a column only if the column contains null values or if the table has no rows at all. After this, you can change the data type only if the column contains null values, and you can convert a char column to a varchar2 data type or convert a varchar2 column to a char data type only if the column contains null values or if you do not change the size of the column. The next question is, describe a few restrictions on using the long data type. So a long column is not copied when a table is created using a subquery. A long column cannot be included in a group by or an order by clause, and only one long column can be used per table. So no constraint can be defined on a long column. So these were some of the restrictions on using the long data type for any particular column. The next question is, what is the set unused option? So set unused option marks one or more columns as unused so that they can be dropped when the demand on system resources is lower. So unused columns are treated as if they were dropped, even though their column data remains in the table's rows. So after a column has been marked as unused, you have no access to that particular column. The next question is a very important question. So what is the difference between truncate and delete? So guys, if you talk about SQL truncate, so this particular statement removes all of the rows from a table and releases the storage space used by that particular table. In case of SQL delete, so it removes all of the rows from a table, but it does not release the storage space which is used by that table. If you talk about the efficiency or the speed, so truncate command is faster, whereas delete command is slower than truncate. SQL truncate statement is a DDL statement, like data definition language statement, and you cannot roll back a truncate statement. Whereas SQL delete is also a DDL statement, but you can use rollback for SQL delete. The last point over here is database triggers do not fire on truncate, whereas database triggers fire in case of SQL delete statement. The next question is, what is the main difference between character and varchar2? So guys, you must be knowing, like we have discussed, like char and varchar2 are data types. So char basically pads blank spaces to a maximum length, whereas varchar2 does not pad blank spaces. So this was a very important difference between char and varchar2. Also, if you talk about the size, there's one more difference that you can mention in terms of size. For character, the maximum size is 2000, and in case of varchar2, the maximum size is 4000. So as you can see, varchar2 is relatively bigger than character or the char. The next question is, what are constraints and how many types of constraints are there? So constraints are used to prevent invalid data entry or deletion if there are dependencies. So constraints enforce rules at the table level. Constraints can be created either at the same time as the table is created or after the table has been created. Constraints can be defined at the column or the table level, and constraint defined for a specific table can be viewed by looking at the user constraints data dictionary table. So you can define any constraint at the table level except not null, which is defined only at the column level. And now if you talk about the types of constraints, so here you have not null constraint, unique key constraint, primary key constraint, foreign key constraint, and check key constraint. So guys, the next question is an extension to the previous question. So this question says, describe the types of constraints in brief. So as we have seen in the previous question, there are basically 5 types of constraints. And if you talk about the not null constraint, so this particular constraint ensures that the column has no null values. So what is the advantage of having no null values? So this constraint ensures that the data consistency or the data quality is maintained in the database. Then you have the unique key constraint. So this particular constraint ensures that every value in a column or a set of columns must be unique. So what do you mean by that? So it means no two rows of a table can have duplicate values in a specified column or a set of columns. So if the unique constraint comprises more than one column, that group of columns is called a composite unique key. So there can be more than one unique key on a table, and the unique key constraint allows input of null values. So unique key automatically creates an index on the column that is created on it. After this, you have the primary key constraint. So this constraint uniquely identifies each row in a table, and only one primary key can be created for each table, but it can have several unique constraints. So primary key ensures that no column can contain a null value, and a unique index is automatically created for a primary key column. So primary key is called a parent key. After this, you have the foreign key constraint. So this is also called referential integrity constraint. So foreign key is one in which a column or a set of columns takes references of the primary key or the unique key of the same or another table. So foreign key is also known as the child key, and a foreign key value must match an existing value in the parent table, or it should be null. And finally, we have the check key constraint. So this particular constraint defines a condition that each row must satisfy. A single column can have multiple check constraints, and during check constraint, there are a few expressions that are not allowed, such as references to cur val, next val, level, and row num pseudo columns, and calls to sysdate, uid, user, and user env functions or the user environment functions. The next question is, what is the main difference between a unique key and a primary key? So if you talk about a unique key, so a table can have more than one unique key, whereas if you talk about primary key, so a table can have only one primary key. Then a unique key column can store null values, whereas a primary key column cannot store null values. In case of unique key, it uniquely identifies each value in a column, whereas a primary key uniquely identifies each row in a table. So these were some of the critical differences between a unique key and a primary key. The next question is, what is the difference between on-delete cascade and on-delete set null? So on-delete cascade indicates that when the row in the parent table is deleted, the dependent rows in the child table will also be deleted. So on-delete set null converts foreign key values to null when the parent value is removed. So without the on-delete cascade or the on-delete set null options, The row in the parent table cannot be deleted if it is referenced in the child table. The next question is, what is a candidate key? So the columns in the table that can act as a primary key are known as candidate keys. Guys, the next question is a very important question as far as PLSQL developer questions are concerned. The question says, what are views and why are they used? So a view logically represents subsets of data from one or more tables, and a view is a logical table based on a table or another view. So a view contains no data of its own, but is like a window through which data from tables can be viewed or changed. The tables on which a view is based is called a base table, and the view is stored as a select statement in the data dictionary. View definitions can be retrieved from the data dictionary table, which is known as user views. And if you talk about the usage of views, so views are used to restrict data access, to make complex queries easy, to provide data independence, and views provide groups of users to access data according to their requirements. So guys, with this, we have come to the PLSQL developer interview questions. And now question number 41 onwards, we will be covering PLSQL interview questions for the experienced candidates, like those candidates who have at least 2 to 3 years of experience with PLSQL. Okay, so the next question over here is, what is the difference between simple and complex views? So if you talk about simple view, so simple view derives data only from one table. On the other hand, if you talk about complex views, so complex view derives data from many tables. In case of simple view, it contains no functions or group of data, whereas in case of complex views, it contains functions or groups of data. The next point over here is, in case of simple view, it can perform DML operations through the view, whereas in case of complex views, it does not allow DML operations through the view. Okay, so these were some of the critical differences between simple and complex views. The next question over here is, what are the restrictions of DML operations on views? So there are a few restrictions of DML operations on views, such as you cannot delete a row if the view contains a group of functions, a group by clause, the distinct keyword, and the pseudo column row num keyword. Okay, apart from this, you cannot modify a data in a view if it contains group by functions, a group by clause, and distinct keyword like the delete from view. And apart from this, in case of modification, like you also cannot contain a pseudo column, row num keyword, and columns defined by expressions. And these were some of the restrictions in case of deleting and modifying the data from a view. So guys, the next question is a very important question. So the question says, describe your experience working with PLSQL and what are the difficulties faced while working with PLSQL and how did you overcome them? Okay, so guys, this is purely, there is no specific answer to this question. So depending upon your experience, like if you have worked for a company in the PLSQL role for at least 2 to 3 years, so for every candidate, their experience might be different. Okay, so you just have to explain what was their experience, like what projects you worked on with PLSQL. And for every project, there might be a few difficulties that you must have encountered. Okay, and the interviewer wants to know, how did you overcome those difficulties? Okay, so this again is, like the difficulties and the approach that you took to overcome them, it depends from person to person. So you just have to mention them, like whatever difficulties that you faced while working with PLSQL in your company and the approach you took to overcome those difficulties. Okay, so the interviewer doesn't, he wants to know, like, how do you overcome any specific problem? Okay, so basically, this is a very subjective question, and the answer for this question will differ from person to person. Okay, so this again is a very important question, as I told you, and you must, briefly explain your working experience with PLSQL in this particular question. Okay, so now let's move ahead with the next question. So the next question says, what are the different functionalities of a trigger? So trigger is also the same as stored procedure, and Also, it will automatically be invoked whenever any DML operation is performed against a table or a view. So basically, there are two types of triggers which are supported by PLSQL. So the first one is a statement level trigger, and then you have the row level trigger. So in a statement level trigger, the trigger body is executed only once for the DML statement. And in case of row level trigger, the trigger body is executed for each row DML statement. So it is the reason we are employing each row clause and internally stored DML transaction in trigger specification. So these qualifiers like old, new are also called as records type variables. Okay, so after explaining statement level triggers and row level triggers, you can also give an example for this. The next question says, write a PLSQL program that raises a user-defined exception on Thursday. So guys, this is another scenario-based question. Like this might happen a lot of times when you actually face the interview. Like I'm talking about the experienced candidates. So the interviewer will give you a question or a scenario, and he will expect you to write a piece of code like or SQL queries or a piece of code like stored procedures and functions. So in this case, the question says you have to write a program that raises a user-defined exception on Thursday. Okay, so guys, as you can see here, this is the code that we have written for this particular question. So here you're declaring an exception called A, and from begin you write the actual code or the logic for this particular program. Okay, so here you are defining the condition. Okay, so your condition is raise a user defined exception on Thursday. So if to char, which is a function, and here you have to mention the date, and the day is Thursday, then raise A. And what is A? A is an exception over here. And here you are ending the if condition, the condition that we have written over here. Then you're defining the exception. Okay, so how do you, this is just declaring an exception, and now you're defining an exception. So when A, which is our exception, then dbms underscore output dot put line, my exception raised on Thursday, and then the end of the program, and then semicolon. So this is how you write a program that raises a user defined exception on Thursday. The next question is, write a PLSQL program to retrieve the employee table and then display the salary. So now this, for this particular program, what you're doing is, as you can see over here, you're declaring a variable vsal, and which is a number of size 10. Then you begin, select max salary and our variable vsal from employee. So employee is the table. After this, what you're outputting, like what are you trying to print on the screen? dbms underscore output dot put line vsal, and then end and semicolon. So this is another very simple program that you must know. So the next question is, what is a mutating trigger? So into a row level trigger based on a table, the trigger body cannot read data from the same table, and also we cannot perform DML operation on the same table. So if you're trying, this Oracle server returns a mutating error like Oracle -4091, and the table is mutating. So what do you mean by this error? So this error is called as mutating error, and this trigger is called a mutating trigger, and the table is called a mutating table. So mutating errors are not occurred in statement level triggers, because through this statement level trigger, when we are performing any DML operation, so automatically data committed into the database, whereas in row level trigger, when we are performing transaction data and this is not committed, and also again we are reading this data from the same table, then only mutating error takes place. The next question is, what are triggering events or trigger predicate clauses? So if we want to perform multiple operations in different tables, then we must use triggering events within the trigger body. So these are, as you can see, inserting, updating, deleting clauses, and these clauses are used in statement level and row level triggers as well. So these triggers are called as trigger predicate clauses. The next question is, what is a discard file? So a discard file has an extension of .dsc. So for discard file, we must specify within the control file by using the discard file clause. So the discard file also stores reflected record based on when clause condition within the control file. So this condition must be satisfied in the table clause. The next question is, what is a ref cursor or cursor variable or dynamic cursor? So Oracle 7.2 introduced ref cursor. So this is a user-defined type that is used to process multiple records, and also this is a record by record process. So in static cursor, database servers execute only one select statement at a time for a single active set area, wherein ref cursor database servers execute a number of select statements dynamically for a single active set area, and that's why those cursors are called as dynamic cursors. Generally, we are not allowed to pass static cursors as parameters to use subprograms, whereas we can also pass ref cursor as a parameter to the subprograms, because basically precursor is a user-defined type in Oracle, where we can also pass all user-defined type as parameter to the subprograms. So the next question is, what are the types of ref cursors? So in all of the databases, you have two reference cursors, like strong reference cursor and weak reference cursor. So a strong ref cursor is a ref cursor that has a return type, whereas a weak ref cursor has no return type. So in weak ref cursor, we must specify a select statement by using open for clause, and this clause is used in the executable section of the PLSQL block. The next question is, what are overloading procedures? So overload refers to the same name that can be used for a different purpose. In case of Oracle, we can also implement an overloading procedure through a package, an overloading procedure having the same name with different types or different numbers of parameters. The next question is, what are the global variables? So in Oracle, we are declaring global variables in package specification only. So what is the biggest advantage of global variables? So the global variables can be accessed from anywhere in the particular program. The next question is, what is forward declaration? So in Oracle, declaring procedures within the package body are called forward declaring. And generally, before we are calling private procedures into public procedures, first we must implement the private procedure within the body. Otherwise, we have to use a forward declaration within the package body. The next question is, what is invalid number and value error? So in Oracle, when we try to convert string type to number type or data string into data type, then the Oracle server returns. And what are those two types of errors? So the first one is the invalid number, and the second one is the value error or numeric error. So in case of invalid number, so when a PLSQL block has a SQL statement, and also those SQL statements try to convert string type to number type or data string into data type, then Oracle server returns an error like ORA-1722- invalid number. If you talk about value error, so whenever PLSQL block having procedural statement and also those statements trying to convert string type to number type, then the Oracle server returns an error. And which is that error? So that error is, I repeat, and that error is ORA-6502 : numeric or value error. So for handling this type of error, Oracle provides exception value error and the exception name. The next question is, what is a flashback query? So flashback query is handled by the database admin. The only flashback queries allow the content of the table to be retrieved with reference to the specific point of time by using as of clause. That is, flashback queries retrieves accidental data after committing the transaction. So flashback queries generally use undo file. That is, flashback queries retrieve old data before committing the transaction to Oracle server by providing two methods for flashback queries. And which are those two methods? The first one is by using the timestamp, and the second method is by using the SCN number. The next question is, what does PLSQL package consist of? So PLSQL consists of two major parts, and they are the package specification and package body. So if you talk about package specification, so it acts as a public interface for your application, which includes procedures, types, and if you talk about package body, it contains the code required to implement the package specification. The next question is, what are the benefits of PLSQL packages? So there are a few benefits of having PLSQL packages, such as we can store functions and procedures in a single unit, which is called as a package, and packages provide security to grant privileges. So functions and procedures within the package share a common variable among them, and packages support even if the functions are overloaded. Apart from this, packages enhance the performance even when multiple objects loaded into memory. The next question is, explain different methods to trace the PLSQL code. So tracing the code is necessary technique to test the performance of the code during the runtime. So we have different methods in PLSQL to trace the code, such as DBMS trace. Then you also have DBMS application info. After this, you have TK proof utilities and TRSS. And then you have DBMS session and DBMS monitor. The next question is, what do you mean by PLSQL cursors? So in PLSQL, to retrieve and process more, it requires a special resource, and that resource is known as cursor. So cursor is defined as a pointer to the context area, and the context area is an area of memory that contains information and SQL statements for processing the statements. The next question is, what is the difference between implicit and explicit cursors? So an implicit cursor is used in PLSQL to declare all SQL data manipulation statements. So an implicit cursor is used to declare statements such as open, close, fetch, and so on. And now if we talk about explicit cursor, so this cursor is explicitly designed to select the statements with the help of a cursor. So this explicit cursor is used to execute the multi-row select function. So an explicit function is used by PLSQL to execute tasks such as update, insert, delete, and so on. The next question is, what is a trigger? So trigger is basically a program in PLSQL that is stored in the database, and it gets executed instantly before or after the update, insert, and delete commands. And now the next question, which is an extension to the previous question. So the question says, what are the uses of database triggers? So triggers are programs that are automatically fired or executed when some events happen, and they are basically used to implement complex security authorizations, to drive the column values, to maintain duplicate tables, to implement complex business rules, and to bring transparency in log events. The next question is, name the two exceptions in PLSQL. So error handling part of PLSQL is called an exception. So we have basically two types of exceptions, like the predefined or the default exceptions, and you also have user-defined exceptions. For this particular questions, you can also give examples, like relevant examples for user-defined exception and predefined exception. The next question is, which command is used to delete the package? So basically, to delete the package in PLSQL, we use the drop package command. The next question is, what is the process for PLSQL compilation? So the compilation process consists of syntax check, bind, and P code generation. So it checks the errors in PLSQL code while compiling. Once all the errors are corrected, a storage address gets allocated to a variable that stores this data. So this particular process is called binding. And P code consists of the list of rules for the PLSQL engine. So it is stored in the database and gets triggered when the next time it is used. So guys, with this, we have come to the end of this session on PLSQL interview questions. I hope you guys have enjoyed this session and you have thoroughly understood whatever concepts that we have discussed in this particular session. If at all you have any queries related to this session, then you can write them in the comments section, and my team is here to help you resolve all your doubts and queries. So guys, I wish you all the very best for your upcoming interview, and thank you so much for being with us.